So this will be a short talk, but there's a purpose to it. So if you're interested in the benchmarking or evaluation of methodology, particularly in medical research, and how we can address this as a community, please reach out to me after the talk. So we're here today because there's an excitement about AI, machine learning, and how that can have an impact, particularly in healthcare. So here's an example I just Googled. This is the first thing that came to mind. I'm not picking on this company, where you can use your mobile phone and detect for early signs of melanoma just using the mobile phone. I mean, if this is true, this is really groundbreaking. It can have an impact in society, but it can also have an impact on medical research. But this begs the question, how do we know this works? Just to give you a context why I'm asking that question, and I'm not trying to be the cynical statistician here. I work in global drug development at Novartis. To give you an idea of what that means is, so anything after discovery of a compound, we take that on and we try to identify is it efficacious and safe so that it can then become a pill in a box or to a biologic in a syringe. We're really trying to answer precisely as possible 5 fundamental questions. We want to know everything we can about the patient, the disease, their characteristics. We want to know everything about the drug, the mode of action, for example. We want to know what's the right dose. We want it to be efficacious, but also safe. We want to know the right route. Should this be a pill? Should it be an injection? And we also want to know the timing. Is this twice a day, once a year? The more precise we can get on all of these 5 questions, the more likely the drug will be approved, it'll be efficacious, it'll be safe. And this is really personalized or precision medicine. We've been doing this for 60 to 100 years. It's really just the quality of the answers to these questions that we're really interested in. So back to my point about this mobile device. It's not that the technology may be wrong. We know that convolutional neural networks are effective, but there's also potential issues with applying them, adopting them to specific problems. So here's a paper from JAMA that highlighted specific issues with training convolutional neural networks for the detection of melanoma. Just to summarize what the problem is, it's nothing to do with the algorithm, it's the data that you feed the algorithm. So it's a confounding issue. So here you see 4 examples. 2 examples have markings of the surgical markings prior to surgery. And this is really indicating that these moles or lesions here are already cancerous. And so the convolutional neural network is picking up the markings prior to surgery rather than detecting the signs of, say, early stages of cancer in the moles themselves. So if you naively feed algorithms data like this, you may be confounding with your outcome. But how do we know that's happened in specific cases? So if there's a black box technology, how do we know this has been trained appropriately? And that's why I'm asking that question. Another reason why I'm asking that question is we're going towards data and digital as a company, as a society. This is just an example of all the particular specific vendors and companies within healthcare at the moment. This is probably out of date. It's probably exponentially grown by now. If as a company we want to do really important clinical research, we want to make sure that our drugs are efficacious and safe, we have to work with these companies or we have to use their methodology. But again, that sort of begs the question, how do we know this works? And that's really the sort of crux of this talk today. As a company, we want to work with the right methodology, the right innovation, and this could be external, it can be internal as well, but how do we systematically evaluate if innovation works? There's 2 approaches to do this that we are proposing. One, you've probably used day-to-day in your work. The other one, I'm not so sure that you've probably seen this if you're working in machine learning community. The first one is a common task framework. I'll just describe that in a second. And the second one is reporting guidelines. The reason that we are trying to introduce this systematic way to evaluate innovation is that we want to not only evaluate and compare methods. So for example, if someone has a method for a specific problem, why did they choose that? Is that the right method to use compared to something else? We want to be able to assess what is the thinking behind the selection of that methodology and is it fit for purpose? We also want to de-risk engagement. So we don't want to give sensitive patient-level data to companies that may not be able to handle that, the sort of sensitivities of the data, or they might not understand the context of the problem. And also we want to reduce internal resources. So innovation at the moment is exponential. It's a full-time job just to keep on track of the innovation that comes out at the moment, particularly in this space. So the common task framework, you use this all the time. It's really simple. You have a question or a problem, a task, you have a data set, and you have a standard, say, set of metrics or evaluation methodology. Why it's called the common task framework is across different research groups or different companies, you agree to what the question is, the shared data set, and also the evaluation. So ImageNet would be one example of the common task framework. This really started out of Bell Labs about 50 years ago when there was a kind of funding issue with machine translation. So they had to beg, borrow, and steal with different companies to be able to do basic research. This has been adopted by the machine learning community, different communities, because the methodology or the research fields are experimental. This is a way to push through innovation using this approach. If you want to know about the history of the common task framework, I would recommend reading this paper. But that also highlights a limitation with the common task framework. If you don't define the question or the context appropriately, then you might be answering the wrong question that really is redundant if you have a state-of-the-art algorithm. John Shuki summed it up here perfectly. So this is why we are also interested in reporting guidelines. If anyone has heard of the consort statement for clinical trials, then that's a reporting guideline. The one that you should be interested in is Tripod. This is for prognostic prediction models. It's being revised at the moment, so it's really focused on clinical prediction models, but it's being updated for artificial intelligence and machine learning. If you're interested in it, please reach out to Gary Collins and Carl Moons, who are driving this initiative. Oh. So the disagreement between Microsoft and Apple. So just to highlight why are reporting guidelines important, they're basically a standard set of recommendations for what you would require to minimally report a project or a search project, so someone can understand what you've done. And that's important. So going back to the previous example, can you transparently show that you haven't introduced, say, confounding into the development and the training of your algorithm? What's the minimal set of information that you need to be able to provide to someone so they can understand what you've done? The Tripod guidelines, they're part of a larger umbrella of guidelines called the Equator Network. The Consort one is probably the leading one, and this is a set of guidelines that really improve the reporting of clinical trials, and that really has improved clinical research. The exact same thing is now trying to happen to prediction models for open sort of observational data for causal inference as well. There's a whole series of reporting guidelines. If you're doing basic research, take these guidelines, and they're really a framework for you to be able to perform your project and report it. It's something where you don't need to reinvent the wheel. And we talk about the reproducibility crisis. A lot of it is down to poor reporting. So I've not got too long left, so a couple of minutes. Yeah, okay. So we've used this approach just to assess vendors, but we're looking at this as a sort of wider framework to evaluate even internal methodology, working with external partners as well. So essentially, we set up a data challenge. We provide either real or synthetic data to vendors, and we ask them to solve a problem. We then use objective measures through the Common Task Framework. This can be things to do with accuracy, stability, transportability. And then we also look at the quality of their reporting. So do they provide us with clear outline of how they handled the data, how they trained the model, how they selected the right train test split, etc. And then this is a way to assess, do we trust the output of their, say, approach? I'll just go into quickly learning so far. So I don't want to say much about the vendors and how they've performed, but if you go to this paper by Chris Chatfield, he's quite an influential statistician. He summarizes the say 7 steps you should do if you want to be a pragmatic quantitative researcher. And some of the things that we've noticed are exploring the context. Are you trying to do prediction, or are you trying to explain, or trying to do inference? These are different problems, and they require different types of models, strategies. This is something that we often see. We're in the field of really trying to understand causation, so sometimes prediction isn't the right approach to solve a problem. Also, just carrying out preliminary examination of data. This is something that's often skipped that we've seen. And then finally, again, I think this is the big one, is communicating the results clearly. What did you do? Did you do what you set out to do, or have you changed course halfway through the project? Everyone talks about interpretability and black boxes, so black box models like deep learning. I think that's a bit of a red herring. The real black boxes that we should be worried about is implementation. So if I can't see your code and how you implemented a model, I don't trust you. I don't really care if your model is interpretable, but if I can't see how you've implemented it, then I think there's a problem. There's a paper by a set of colleagues, Ben van Kalse, that talks about this problem in general. And I think when we talk about black boxes, these are the black boxes we should be worried about. Okay, so really, next steps. This is really just an overview of where we are, particularly in my group at Novartis. We're thinking about how to do research on research, and we don't think this is something that we can do as a group as a whole. We think this is a community-based approach. I think we need to have a set of problems like ImageNet for clinical development, where we have shared data sets, shared evaluation strategies, and we can start to evaluate what is the most fit for purpose methodology for specific problems. So if you're interested in speaking more about this, then please reach out. Thank you.